You want to know how an entire military dynasty got wiped off the galactic map in less time than it takes to brew a decent cup of coffee? Well, sit down and shut up. Because I am about to tell you the most spectacular example of cosmic stupidity I have ever witnessed in my 47 years of government service. My name is Quint Mora 8, and I process incident reports for the Galactic Council. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. When you are the guy who has to document every time some species decides to do something monumentally stupid, you get a front row seat to the galaxy's greatest hits of how to accidentally commit species suicide. But this one takes the prize for sheer, jaw-dropping, mind-numbing idiocy. The whole mess started on what should have been a perfectly ordinary day at the Council headquarters on Nexus Prime. Representatives from 347 different species were conducting their usual business of arguing about trade routes, territorial disputes, and who gets to tax what in which star system. Standard bureaucratic nonsense that keeps the galaxy from exploding into total war every other Tuesday. That someone was a human child named Lucy Harper. Now, before you start thinking this is some heartwarming story about intergalactic friendship and understanding, let me stop you right there. This is not that kind of story. This is the kind of story that ends with body counts so high that the cleanup crews need therapy. Lucy Harper was 8 years old, had pigtails, wore a bright yellow dress with little flowers on it, and carried around a stuffed animal that looked like some kind of earth creature called a bunny. She was visiting the council with her father, Ambassador David Harper, who represented the human colonies in the Outer Rim territories. Humans, you see, are still considered a minor species by most of the galaxy. They have been part of the Council for only about 50 years, which is basically yesterday in galactic political terms. Most species see them as these soft, weak creatures who somehow manage to stumble into space travel without killing themselves first. The general consensus is that humans are harmless, naive, and not worth taking seriously. This particular day, Ambassador Harper was attending a session about trade regulations in the Centauri sector, which is about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum. His daughter was supposed to be in the designated children's area, supervised by council staff, while Daddy dealt with the mind-numbing bureaucracy of interstellar commerce. But children, as any species that has evolved beyond single-cell organisms knows, have this annoying habit of wandering off when they get bored. And Lucy Harper was very, very bored. So there she was, skipping through the corridors of the most important governmental building in the galaxy, humming some human nursery rhyme, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to trigger the most devastating military response in recorded history. The trouble started when she wandered into Section Gamma 7, which was restricted to council members only. This particular section housed the diplomatic quarters for the Zarathian hegemony, a species that makes angry wasps look cuddly and reasonable. Zarathians are, well, let me put this diplomatically. They are complete and utter psychopaths. They have been waging constant wars for the past 3,000 years, conquering everything they can reach and enslaving or exterminating everything they cannot. The only reason the Council tolerates them is because they control 17 key systems and have enough firepower to turn any argument into a very short and extremely violent discussion. Their leader, Warlord Grixthane Destroyer, was exactly what you would expect from a species whose idea of diplomacy involves disintegrating anyone who disagrees with them. He stood 12 feet tall, had natural armor plating that could stop small-caliber weapons, and possessed exactly zero tolerance for anything that did not immediately prostrate itself before his magnificence. His personal guards, the Crimson Claws, were hand-picked killers who had each eliminated at least 100 enemies in single combat. They were trained from birth to show no mercy, feel no compassion, and respond to any perceived threat with overwhelming lethal force. So when little Lucy Harper wandered into their diplomatic quarters, humming her nursery rhyme and clutching her bunny, you can probably guess what happened next. Actually, no. You probably cannot guess, because what happened next was so stupid, so unnecessarily brutal, so completely contrary to every rule of civilized behavior, that even I have trouble believing it actually occurred. Grixthane Destroyer took one look at this tiny human child, this 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress who posed absolutely no threat to anyone except maybe some unfortunate flower beds, and decided she was an assassin. An assassin. a trained killer sent to eliminate him through the cunning use of pigtails and stuffed animals. The paranoia of absolute power, ladies and gentlemen. When you have spent your entire existence murdering your way to the top, everyone starts to look like a potential threat, including children who barely reach your kneecap. "Seize the human spy!" Grixthane Destroyer roared, his voice echoing through the diplomatic quarters like thunder made of pure malice. Lucy looked up from her bunny, confused and more than a little scared. "I am sorry," she said in that polite way human children are taught to speak to adults. "I think I got lost. Can you help me find my daddy?" The response to this innocent request was swift and brutal. 3 crimson claws grabbed the child, restraining her small arms while she cried out in fear. Her stuffed bunny fell to the floor, forgotten in the sudden violence. "Please," Lucy sobbed. "I just want my daddy. I did not mean to come here. Please let me go now." This is where any rational being would have stopped, realized they had made a terrible mistake, and immediately released the obviously harmless child. This is where common sense, basic decency, or even simple self-preservation instincts should have kicked in. But Zarathians do not do rational. They do not do common sense, and they definitely do not do self-preservation when their pride is involved. Instead, Warlord Grixthane Destroyer decided to make an example of this human spy. He ordered his guards to interrogate the child, using whatever methods they deemed necessary to extract information about human military capabilities and invasion plans. From an 8-year-old girl, who was carrying a stuffed bunny and wearing a dress with flowers on it. The interrogation lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. I know this because the entire incident was recorded by the diplomatic quarters' security systems, and I have had the misfortune of reviewing the footage multiple times for official reports. Those 3 minutes and 17 seconds changed everything. You see, what nobody in the galaxy understands about humans is that they have this thing called pack bonding. It is not just limited to their own species. Humans will pack bond with literally anything. Other humans, alien species, their machines, their plants, random animals they find on the street. Hell, I have seen humans form emotional attachments to their food before eating it. But the strongest pack bonds of all are the ones between human adults and human children. Any human children. It does not matter if they are related or not. Touch a human child in front of a human adult, and you have just activated something that evolution spent millions of years perfecting into the ultimate defensive response. Ambassador David Harper was 3 corridors away when he heard his daughter scream. The sound that came out of his throat in response was not human. It was something older, something primal, something that spoke to every parent across every species about the fundamental biological imperative to protect one's offspring. By the time Ambassador Harper reached the Zarathian quarters, Lucy was unconscious, her small body showing clear signs of physical abuse. The Crimson Claws were laughing about how easy it had been to break the human spy, while Warlord Grixthane Destroyer stood over her motionless form with obvious satisfaction. That was when Ambassador Harper stopped being a diplomat and became something else entirely. "You hurt my little girl," he said, and his voice was so quiet, so calm, so absolutely devoid of emotion, that every Zarathian in the room suddenly felt their survival instincts start screaming warnings. Grixthane Destroyer laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Your spawn was weak, human. Perhaps now your pathetic species will learn to respect their betters." The Warlord was still laughing when Ambassador Harper's first punch caved in his skull. Now I need to explain something about David Harper that apparently nobody in the Zarathian intelligence network had bothered to research. Before he became a diplomat, he had been a soldier. Not just any soldier, but a member of something called the Human Colonial Marines, an elite fighting force that specialized in exactly the kind of close-quarters combat that wins wars and ends civilizations. More importantly, he had been part of a unit called the Devil Dogs, which even other human soldiers spoke about in whispers. These were the humans who got sent when the regular humans could not handle the situation. The humans who turned impossible missions into footnotes in history books. The Crimson Claws, these hand-picked killers who had each defeated 100 enemies in single combat, lasted approximately 37 seconds against a single human father whose daughter had been hurt. 37 seconds. That is how long it took Ambassador Harper to turn the most elite warriors in the Zarathian military into decorative wall art. But David Harper was not done. Not even close. Because while he had been methodically dismantling the Crimson Claws with his bare hands, he had been making phone calls. Specifically, he had been calling his old unit, his old friends, his old contacts in the human military, who understood that some things were more important than diplomatic immunity or interstellar treaties. He had been calling people who understood that when you hurt a human child, you do not get to hide behind political protection or species sovereignty or any other bureaucratic nonsense. You get to meet the devil dogs. The first transport ships began arriving in orbit around Nexus Prime exactly 8 minutes and 43 seconds after Lucy Harper lost consciousness. 47 ships, carrying 2 full regiments of the most dangerous humans the galaxy had never heard of, armed with weapons that officially did not exist, and operating under orders that were never written down. Their mission was simple. Find everyone responsible for hurting Lucy Harper. Remove them from existence. Do it quickly. The Galactic Council's emergency session was called for exactly 10 minutes after the initial incident. Representatives from every major species gathered in the main chamber to discuss this unprecedented violation of diplomatic sanctuary and the immediate military response that was currently descending on their capital world. They were still arguing about jurisdiction and proper procedures when Ambassador Harper walked into the chamber, carrying Warlord Grixthane Destroyer's severed head by the hair. He set it on the central podium, looked around at the assembled representatives with those calm, emotionless eyes that had terrified an entire Zarathian kill squad, and said 5 words that would be remembered for the rest of galactic history. Nobody touches our children. Ever. And that, my friends, was when the galaxy finally understood what humans were really capable of when properly motivated. The silence that followed Ambassador Harper's declaration lasted exactly 4.3 seconds. I timed it because I was pretty sure I was witnessing the moment when galactic history split into before and after. Then, High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime, a pompous windbag from the Hegemony Coalition, made the second biggest mistake of the day. Ambassador Harper, he wheezed through his breathing apparatus, you have violated every treaty, every law, every principle of civilized conduct. You cannot simply murder a diplomatic representative and— The sound that David Harper made was not quite a laugh. It was more like the noise a fusion reactor makes right before it melts through the containment field. Civilized conduct? Your people tortured an 8-year-old child, you sanctimonious piece of organic waste. High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime's multiple eyes blinked rapidly. The Zarathian delegation was within their rights to detain suspected infiltrators according to Section 12 of the Diplomatic Security Protocols. Section 12, Harper interrupted, his voice still carrying that terrifying calm, covers the detention of suspected hostile agents. It does not cover torturing children who got lost looking for their fathers. That was when Ambassador Krill 9/, representing the Zarathian hegemony's remaining diplomatic corps, decided to compound their species' already catastrophic day by opening his mandibles. The human spawn was clearly a trained operative, he clicked, his chitinous form bristling with indignation. No ordinary child could have penetrated our security perimeter. The interrogation was necessary to determine the extent of human infiltration capabilities. I want you to understand something about what happened next. David Harper did not move from his position at the podium. He did not raise his voice. He did not make any threatening gestures. He simply turned his head to look directly at Ambassador Krill 9/ and smiled. It was the kind of smile that makes prey animals run for their lives, and predators suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Interrogation, Harper repeated softly. Is that what you call beating an unconscious child? The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Every representative present suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions on everything from trade agreements to the fundamental nature of reality. Ambassador Krill 9/, either blessed with tremendous courage or cursed with terminal stupidity, continued his defense. The Zarathian military does not recognize human concepts of age-based immunity. All potential threats are treated with appropriate caution. Appropriate caution. Harper nodded thoughtfully. Well, let me tell you about human concepts of appropriate response. He pressed something on his wrist communicator, and the main viewing screen activated to show the space around Nexus Prime. What had been empty void 10 minutes ago was now filled with human warships. Not the sleek, elegant vessels that most species preferred, but ugly, functional death machines that looked like they had been designed by engineers who had given up on aesthetics and focused entirely on making things explode very efficiently. 47 ships, Harper announced conversationally. 2 full Marine regiments. 3,000 of my closest friends, all of whom take a very dim view of child abuse. High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime's breathing apparatus was working overtime. This is an act of war. You cannot deploy military forces in Council space without authorization. War? Harper tilted his head slightly. Chancellor, this is not war. War implies that both sides have a chance of winning. That was when the first reports started coming in. The Zarathian home fleet, all 63 ships of what was considered the most powerful military force in the sector, had just suffered what could only be described as a comprehensive existence failure. Admiral Torque's Kesh Annihilator's flagship has been destroyed, announced the communications officer, his voice cracking with disbelief. All hands lost. The remaining Zarathian vessels they are surrendering, sir. The entire fleet. Surrendering. To a force that had appeared out of nowhere and systematically dismantled their military superiority in less time than it takes to order lunch. Ambassador Krill 9/ was making sounds that roughly translated to, "This is impossible," in several different octaves. You see, Harper continued, as if discussing the weather, rather than the complete annihilation of a military empire. Humans have this thing about children. Any children. We get a little irrational when someone hurts them. The reports kept coming. Zarathian military installations across 17 systems were going dark, not destroyed in massive orbital bombardments, but surgically removed by forces that struck with precision and vanished before any effective response could be mounted. How? Whispered Ambassador Krill 9/. How is this possible? We have the most advanced military in the galaxy. Our warriors are bred for combat. Our technology is superior to anything humans possess. Harper smiled again, and I swear the lighting in the chamber dimmed in response. You know what your problem is? You think superior technology and bred warriors make you dangerous. But humans? We learned to be dangerous the hard way. We clawed our way to the top of our food chain without any natural advantages. No claws, no armor, no poison, no built-in weapons, just brains, determination, and an absolute refusal to give up. The communications officer looked like he was about to have some kind of nervous breakdown. Sir, we are receiving reports from Zarathian Territorial Command. All major population centers are reporting human marine landings. They are demanding the immediate surrender of all military assets and the extradition of anyone involved in the assault on the human child. Extradition for what purpose? High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Execution, Harper replied simply. Public execution. We want to make sure everyone understands the consequences of hurting human children. Ambassador Krill 9/ was now making sounds that suggested his species' equivalent of a panic attack. You cannot do this. We are a sovereign nation. We have rights under galactic law. Rights? Harper laughed, and this time it was genuine amusement. You forfeited your rights when you decided to torture a little girl in a yellow dress. What you have now is a choice. Surrender everyone involved in hurting Lucy, and we will let your species continue to exist, resist, and we will demonstrate exactly why humans survived long enough to reach the stars. The next hour was a masterclass in applied terror, not the crude intimidation that most species practiced, but surgical psychological warfare that targeted every weakness and fear that the Zarathian hegemony had spent centuries trying to hide. Human forces appeared everywhere and nowhere. They struck military targets with impossible precision, dismantled communication networks with surgical accuracy, and captured strategic positions without firing a shot. It was like watching a chess grandmaster play against a toddler, except the chess pieces were warships, and the board was an entire sector of space. But the most terrifying part was not the military superiority. It was the complete absence of anger or hatred in anything the humans did. They were not acting out of rage or vengeance. They were simply solving a problem with the kind of methodical efficiency that you use to fix a broken machine. Lucy Harper was a problem that needed to be addressed. The Zarathians had created that problem. Therefore, the Zarathians needed to be removed from the equation. It was that simple, that logical, and that absolutely terrifying. Within 2 hours, the Zarathian hegemony had gone from a galactic superpower to a historical footnote. Their military was gone, their government was in full collapse, and every surviving member of their species was begging for mercy from the humans they had dismissed as weak and harmless. The last transmission from the Zarathian homeworld was a desperate plea for negotiation, broadcast on all frequencies. "Please, we surrender. We will give you anything. Just tell us what you want." Ambassador Harper listened to the message with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire crisis. Then he leaned toward the microphone and spoke 4 words that would become the most quoted phrase in galactic history. "We want our daughter." Lucy Harper was returned within the hour, conscious, treated by the best medical specialists the Zarathian hegemony could provide, and accompanied by formal written apologies from every surviving member of their government. She was still wearing her yellow dress, still carrying her stuffed bunny, and when she saw her father, she ran to him with the kind of pure joy that only children can manage. "Daddy," she cried, throwing her arms around his neck. "I knew you would find me." Ambassador Harper held his daughter close, and for just a moment, the terrifying human war machine became what he had always been. A father who loved his little girl more than life itself. "I told you I would always protect you, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "Always." The Galactic Council passed Resolution 2847 Alpha that same day, officially recognizing the Harper Doctrine as binding galactic law. The resolution was simple and direct. Any hostile action against human children will be considered an act of war against the entire human species, and will be met with immediate and overwhelming retaliation. Not a single species voted against it. The Zarathian hegemony was dissolved by unanimous consent, their territories divided among species that promised to treat their new populations with appropriate care and respect. The surviving Zarathians were relocated to carefully monitored colonies, where they could rebuild their civilization under human supervision. Warlord Grixthane Destroyer's head remained on display in the council chamber for exactly 1 year, as a reminder to anyone who might be tempted to test human resolve. When it was finally removed, it was replaced with a simple plaque that read, "Nobody touches our children. Ever." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress accidentally became the most protected person in the galaxy. But the story does not end there. Oh no, because when you fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy by demonstrating that humans are not the harmless prey species everyone thought they were, there are consequences. Big, messy, complicated consequences that keep incident report clerks like me very busy for years to come. Within 72 hours of what historians now call the Lucy Harper incident, every major species in the galaxy was frantically reviewing their intelligence files on humanity, and what they found made their previous assessments look like comedy sketches written by particularly optimistic children. The humans had not been lucky. They had not stumbled into their victories through superior technology or numerical advantage. They had been playing a completely different game while everyone else was still figuring out the rules. Take their colony ships, for instance. Every species had assumed they were exactly what they appeared to be: slow, lumbering transport vessels designed to move civilians and supplies across vast distances. What the intelligence analysts discovered was that every single human colony ship was actually a disguised warship capable of rapid conversion into a mobile military platform. Those peaceful human agricultural worlds? Military supply depots with camouflaged weapons manufacturing facilities. The human merchant marine? A civilian fleet that could be converted into an invasion force with about 6 hours' notice. The human diplomatic corps? Military intelligence officers with advanced training in psychological warfare and strategic planning. They have been preparing for this for decades, announced Director Flux Prime Analysis during an emergency intelligence briefing that I had the misfortune to transcribe. Every human expansion, every trade agreement, every diplomatic mission has been part of a comprehensive military strategy. High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime was still trying to process the implications. Are you telling me that the humans have been planning to conquer the galaxy? No, sir, Director Flux Prime Analysis replied with the kind of precision that comes from reviewing classified documents until your optical organs bleed. They have been planning to defend themselves from anyone who might threaten their families. The conquest capability appears to be a side effect. A side effect. The complete military domination of known space was a side effect of human family protection instincts. The intelligence revelations kept getting worse. Human research stations in remote systems were actually early warning networks capable of detecting fleet movements 3 sectors away. Human cultural exchange programs were reconnaissance missions that had been mapping every major military installation in the galaxy. Human peace activists were psychological warfare specialists who had been studying the fear responses and breaking points of every known species. How long have they been doing this? High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime asked, his breathing apparatus working harder than usual. Based on our analysis, Director Flux Prime Analysis replied, approximately 53 years. Since the day they first made contact with galactic civilization. 53 years. From the moment humans had first encountered other species, they had been systematically preparing for the possibility that someone might threaten their children. Not their military, not their territory, not their resources. Their children. It was the most comprehensive defensive strategy in recorded history, and nobody had seen it coming, because nobody had bothered to ask the right questions about human nature. But the real revelation came when the Council's Xenopsychology Department released their emergency assessment of human protective behavior. Dr. Zenth Val Mindwriter, the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies psychology, presented findings that made every previous study of human behavior look like finger painting. Humans, she announced to a packed conference room, do not think like any other known species. Their protective instincts are not limited to immediate family members or even their own species. They extend these feelings to any creature they perceive as vulnerable or in need of protection. The implications were, staggering humans did not just protect human children. They protected all children from all species, with the same terrifying intensity they had displayed during the Zarathian crisis. We have documented cases, Dr. Zenthval Mindreader continued, of humans adopting orphaned Krellian spawn, nursing injured Thracian hatchlings back to health, and even forming emotional bonds with artificial intelligences that they perceive as childlike. Ambassador Krill 9/, one of the few surviving Zarathian diplomatic staff, was frantically taking notes. Are you saying that humans would have reacted the same way if we had attacked a child from any species? Not the same way, Dr. Zenthval Mindreader replied with clinical precision, more intensely. Human protective responses are directly proportional to the perceived helplessness of the victim. The younger, smaller, or more vulnerable the target, the more devastating their retaliation becomes. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Every species present suddenly found themselves reconsidering every interaction they had ever had with human civilians, especially those involving younger members of their populations. There is more, Dr. Zenthval Mindreader announced, and her tone suggested that the more was not going to be good news. Human pack bonding behavior extends beyond biological relationships. They form these protective attachments with remarkable speed and intensity. We have observed humans developing parental responses to alien children within hours of first contact. The Xenopsychology Department had also discovered something that explained why human retaliation had been so swift and coordinated. Humans maintained what they called emergency family networks that could be activated instantly in case of threats to any human child anywhere in the galaxy. Every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost was connected to a communication system that could mobilize military assets within minutes of receiving a distress signal. Not for territorial defense or resource protection, but specifically for child protection scenarios. They have turned their entire civilization into a child protection service, Dr. Zenth Val Mindreader concluded, with military capabilities that exceed anything we previously thought possible. The economic implications were equally disturbing. Human trade relationships, which had seemed random and unprofitable to most analysts, suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of military logistics. Humans had been establishing supply lines, strategic partnerships, and resource agreements specifically designed to support rapid military deployment anywhere in the galaxy. Their seemingly innocent cultural exchange programs had resulted in human families scattered across hundreds of worlds, creating local connections and intelligence networks that could be activated for child protection purposes. Their humanitarian aid missions had established goodwill and strategic relationships with species that could provide staging areas for military operations. Even their entertainment industry served a strategic purpose. Human movies, books, and games had been spreading throughout galactic culture for decades, subtly conditioning other species to think of humans as harmless and sympathetic. Meanwhile, these same cultural products were gathering detailed psychological profiles on alien audiences, mapping their fears, desires, and potential breaking points. It is the most sophisticated psychological warfare campaign in recorded history, announced strategic analyst Mort 9 Tactics during yet another emergency briefing. And they have been conducting it so subtly that we mistook it for friendship. The military assessments were even more sobering. The human fleet that had appeared around Nexus Prime represented less than 2% of their actual military capacity. The forces that had dismantled the Zarathian hegemony were considered local reserves by human military standards. How many ships do they actually have? High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime asked, and his breathing apparatus was starting to sound like a steam engine under stress. Admiral Gorth Tech Superior consulted his datapad with obvious reluctance. Based on our revised intelligence estimates, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 active warships, with the capacity to construct additional vessels at a rate that exceeds the combined shipbuilding capabilities of all other known species. 15,000 warships, hidden throughout human space in facilities that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure, ready to deploy anywhere in the galaxy within 72 hours if any human child was threatened. The galaxy had spent 50 years thinking humans were a minor species with limited military capabilities. The reality was that humans had become the dominant military power in known space, while everyone else was busy underestimating them. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation was what happened to the individual Zarathians who had been directly involved in Lucy Harper's torture. They had not been executed, as everyone had expected. Instead, they had been subjected to something far worse: human justice. The humans had a concept called restorative justice that focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The Zarathians responsible for hurting Lucy were being forced to understand exactly what they had done, to feel genuine remorse for their actions, and to spend the rest of their lives working to prevent similar crimes. They were being taught empathy by humans who specialized in psychological reconstruction. It was the most terrifying punishment anyone could imagine, because it actually worked. The former Zarathian warriors were becoming better people despite themselves, and the psychological trauma of personal growth was apparently worse than death. "They are turning us into them," one of the reformed Zarathians had written in his mandatory rehabilitation journal. "I understand now why I hurt the small human. I understand that it was wrong. I understand that I must spend my life ensuring that no other child suffers as she did. And I hate that I understand these things, because understanding them means I can never go back to who I was." Human justice did not destroy their enemies. It improved them. It was the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare imaginable, and it created allies out of former threats while simultaneously serving as a deterrent to future aggression. The final assessment from the Council's Strategic Planning Committee was unanimous. Humanity was not just a major galactic power. They were the galactic power, and they had achieved this status while making everyone else believe they were harmless refugees from a backwater planet. "How do we proceed?" High Chancellor Vex Thomas Prime asked during the final emergency session. The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Sarah Chin, the human representative who had replaced David Harper after he requested a transfer to spend more time with his daughter, stood up with a smile that was somehow both warm and terrifying. "You proceed very carefully," she said in the same calm tone that had preceded the annihilation of the Zarathian hegemony. "You remember that we are all family here, and families protect each other, and you make absolutely sure that no one ever hurts our children again. Because sometimes, mercy is a luxury that the universe cannot afford. And sometimes, the only appropriate response to absolute evil is absolute annihilation. The humans understood this. The rest of us learned it the hard way.